Among the 12 tribes of Israel, the tribe of Levi had the particular honour of taking care of the tabernacle, as we've seen, and the sons of Aaron in particular had the privilege of being priests. Now, we've thought before about the fact that it's hard work and the burden is undoubtedly heavy, but nevertheless, it is a blessed life to be able to live publicly, openly, in the service of God and devote all that you have to Him and the blessing of His people. It is a joy to be part of that community. But of course, not everybody gets to enjoy that privilege. We considered yesterday how, frustrating though it might be for some of us, not everybody is able to serve as a priest. That position can only be occupied by certain people. Again, if you're an Israelite and you are frustrated to find out that you are not able to serve God in all the ways that you might want to serve God, if you were persuaded that you are willing to serve wholeheartedly and you are able to serve with all the required skill and strength and spirituality, and the only thing holding you back is the permission of God to do so, to take up a particular position, well then you might well be delighted to hear Numbers chapter 6, the Nazarite vow. Chapter 6 verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, if a man or a woman wants to make a special vow, a vow of dedication to the Lord as a Nazarite, here is what they must do." So, understand this. Anyone, man or woman, it was spelled out for us, from any of the 12 tribes can step up to serve God as a Nazarite. When it comes to this position, the choice is yours entirely. You can choose to step up and say publicly, "I will conduct myself with a priestly kind of purity, even though I'm not perhaps a priest, just because of the gratitude I have in my heart because of what God has done." And that does seem to be the reason to take up this kind of Nazarite vow. There's no other tangible benefit mentioned in the text. So it seems then that this is simply a worshipful response to what God has done for you. And so by responding in this way, people will no doubt ask, why are you living like this? Why did you take that vow? Why do you do this and refrain from that? Well, by living like this then, you are inviting the question and you are afforded the opportunity to tell others of what God has done for you. There is something especially noble about someone who takes on a Nazarite vow because they do not have to do this. Those who choose to set themselves apart in this way do so only because they want to. So the devotion of the Nazarite must be obvious, not just inwardly, but outwardly. You see their particular practices. They must not drink wine or fermented drink. They can't even have grape juice. We read that no razor must touch their head, so they must let their hair grow out for the period of their vow at least. So if you vowed for 30 days, then at the end of it, you might look a bit scruffy. But if you vowed for 300 days, then by the end of it, you're going to look somewhat alarming, aren't you? We read that the Nazarites, just like the priests, are supposed to be just the picture of purity. The most famous Nazarite in the Bible, perhaps, was Samson, and he was put in that position not just for a period of time, but for the entirety of his life. But you'll know, if you read the story, that he treated that position with contempt. He cared little for the restrictions that God required of him. So, in fact, he looked different outwardly, but inwardly he was not set apart. He was not holy or different or distinct in his devotion to God. So what is required then for a faithful Nazarite to honour God is just that they are set apart and different, inwardly and outwardly. Now, being different can be difficult, can't it? I mean, sometimes we find this, even as Christians today, that we kind of just want to blend in as much as possible. We don't want to cause a fuss or stand out. Yes, there are convictions that I hold, and I do hold them firmly, but I hold them privately and quietly. Well, what was true of the Nazarites here is also true of Christians today. We should be willing to be different and seen as being different. Not just different inwardly, but also different outwardly. People should be able to see, not from how we look, but from how we live, that we are not like the rest of our culture. We live like this and we act like that deliberately and decisively and by our own personal choice. A Nazarite could be immediately identified by their hair, of course. A Christian should be immediately identified by their whole life devoted to God. Those who took a Nazarite vow very quickly became comfortable with the fact that their faith was to be a public thing, not a private thing. Their devotion was something that they were happy to declare, not something they were simply looking to stuff down deep inside. There is a lot that you and I can learn from that. In the book of 1 Peter, we read that our lives, of course, belong to God. They ought to be devoted to Him entirely, and that should make us different, inwardly and outwardly. The way we live ought to attract the attention of others. They ought to be provoked to ask, why do you live like that? And we should be prepared to answer, because of what God has done for me. 1 Peter 3:15. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give a reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. May God enable us to do exactly that today.